Hello and welcome back to the Argyle CISO Leadership Forum, the evolution of information security. My name is Michael with Argyle. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsor's virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator, Aaron Balio, Chief Information Security Officer with the University of Oklahoma. We're excited to have Aaron and our panelists with us for a panel discussion titled Culture Country, How to Develop a Human-Centric Security-Conscious Culture. Aaron, we're so happy to have you with us today. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate the introductions. And welcome to all of you attending today. Hopefully this is an informational session for you and you get something out of this on security culture and some ideas you can take back to your organization. We have an excellent panel across a number of different verticals. As stated, I come from higher ed. I'm with the University of Oklahoma, and I want to go through and introduce each of our panelists and give them an opportunity to kind of share their background and who they're with. So I'll start with Ed. Would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning here from Los Angeles. I appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. I am currently the Director of Risk Assessments and Testing for Warner Brothers Discovery. And in that role, I oversee application security testing and third-party risk management from a vendor standpoint. My focus also in the number of years has been on enterprise security architecture. So looking forward to it.
Appreciate it. We'll go over to Jonathan. Would you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. My name's John Fowler. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Concilio. We are an electronic discovery and legal technology services provider, work with a number of the Fortune 500, including Ed's company. So we're very fortunate, or I'm very fortunate to be on the panel today. I've been with the company going on 20 years at this point and kind of cut my chops coming up through the forensics and IR space. So it's great to be here today.
All right, thank you, John. And last, Michael, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. So my name is Michael Oglesby, and I'm the Vice President of the Specialty Engineering Group at Rubrik. For those who don't know, Rubrik is a data security company, specializes in protecting data and being able to recover data and protect it in a unique way against cyber attacks. So I work with customers, have an engineering team that works with customers and making sure that we're providing value and being able to protect data, as I mentioned, in unique ways. Prior to Rubrik, come from the customer side, of course, and was involved in network security, information security, as well as IT infrastructure for several years. So excited to be on this panel and share anything that I can provide that could be helpful.
All right, thanks, Michael. So we've established we have a lot of experience here, a lot of background both on the vendor side and on the customer side. So, we all seem to be in organizations that are pretty good size. So Ed, let me start with you. Can you describe maybe what corporate culture is and how does security play into that?
So in my view, this corporate security culture, well, the culture is the things that make up the company that are not necessarily policy, right? They're not the structures, the formalized things. It's how you interact and why you interact in the way you do. But from a security standpoint, I firmly believe that a strong security culture comes from the belief that security is part of business and it's an existence in business. It's not just something that you're trying to prevent incidents from causing pain and suffering financially and reputationally, but it actually means that security is a valuable asset to your business. Aaron, you're on mute.
Thanks. I like that insight, especially that part. It's kind of how what we do, right, as a individual and how that plays in the organization. Jonathan, is there anything you want to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of what our culture is, right? It's a set of behaviors. You know, our head of human resources has a great way to describe it. You know, these are behaviors that we expect, we value, and we reward. So, you know, an overall culture encompasses a lot, but the security culture aspect of it, Ed kind of touched on it, and I think I come at it from the perspective of, you know, a successful security culture, when you look at it, is one where everybody understands they have a role to play in security, right? It's not just the security team's job to handle everything security related, and I'm just over here doing whatever, whenever, however I want to do it. But it's essential to get that buy-in to create a strong security culture.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Both of you have kind of touched on some of those successes or what's needed for success in the security culture. Michael, how about you from a vendor perspective and just in your background as a customer? Do you agree, disagree? Like, what would you add here?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it belongs, of course, to the entire organization. I think what's interesting in my role is I'm a part of an organization, so I'm having to abide by the rules and the processes and procedures that security has put in place, even for me, as I'm talking about similar thing to customers. So it's interesting that I am an end user and think about it in that way. I think when we view of security cultures in the past, a lot of times us in security have been viewed as the bad guys because we've implemented these technologies and frameworks that have created a bunch of user friction. And that's ultimately made jobs difficult. And if we're making jobs difficult, if we're creating friction, that prevents our end users from being able to do the organizational mission and to provide that that ability to do their work to the organization. So I think we need to, as security professionals, change that perception that we aren't the bad guys and that we're all in this together, and culture can go a long way in helping that.
Yeah, I like that idea of friction. Certainly, we don't want to be that little piece of sand that gets under your fingernail, right? And it kind of grates and against the organization, what they're trying to do, what their mission is. So, but all three of you kind of honed in on, you know, the organization makes this a success. So if that's the case, then why do you think so many organizations struggle with this development, right, of a risk-conscious security culture or getting this buy-in from the whole organization? John, let's start with you.
Sure, and I think, you know, one thing, I'll go back to something I was touching on, you know, where we need buy-in from everybody. And it's an anecdote, you know, I've said it before, and there's a business leader that I worked with who kind of viewed security, you know, he always loved to quote Jack Nicholson, right, from A Few Good Men, back at me, you know, I want you on that wall, I need you on that wall, you know, you and your team. And, you know, it's something, sitting down to have a discussion, right, it's almost kind of saying, hey, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but it's not just me and the team that's up here, right? You know, it's pretty easy for someone inside this wall we're guarding to go open the front door and things go haywire. And I think one of the things, you know, you mentioned the analogy of, you know, being that little grain of sand. You know, for a long time, I've heard, you know, Department of No. You know, we're the ones that are holding up revenue for pick your business unit because, you know, whatever they want to push out isn't fully secure, or they're trying to fix something that security said needed to be fixed. So we're not going to meet our revenue goal. Don't blame me, go blame the security team. Those blockers, that they've historically been there. And honestly, I think they're just going to continue to be there. It's, you know, we talk a lot about, oh, DevSecOps is hot, right? We're going to be further left and upstream. That's great. We go further upstream, and now we've just moved the block, or the perception of the block, further upstream. So I think this notion that we are somehow here to pump the brakes on everything that the business wants to do, is something we've got to continually educate and inform users on. Otherwise, we'll continue to be the Department of No for a while.
Yeah, great insight. Michael, anything you want to add on why you think some of the organizations struggle?
I think so. A lot of it depends on the size of the organization, how mature that organization is as well. If it's a very mature organization that's been practicing cybersecurity principles for quite a while, then I think adding in additional functionality processes is not easy, but it's expected. I think with organizations that are now understanding the true risk that they have and the true risk that they're exposed to, it's something completely different. It's a different set of problems to where they really need to start at the basics and teach the basics. It's just like learning an instrument or learning a new hobby. You have to start at the absolute bottom and make it very easy for everybody to understand, because it's a new skill that they're having to learn and adapt to. And I think as organizations get larger and larger and larger, there's still basics to be taught. There's still basics to reaffirm and making sure that everybody understands those. And I hope that's something that all organizations are working towards. I know that we work on that internally, always teaching the basics, even when you have a very technical user base. But even sometimes that real technical user base can sometimes be the worst users to try to train and teach. So I think it's really dependent upon each organization, the size of the organization, and where they are at in their journey around cyber risk.
Yeah. Ed, how about you? What have you seen in your organization?
So I like what Michael said about training and teaching the basics and sort of the fundamentals, but I want to come back to something Jonathan mentioned. This idea that we are the Department of No and all that other stuff. For me, it's a function of leadership mattering, right? So people in our organization are going to value what their leaders value. And if the leadership of the organization is pushing product releases fast because that's the culture at that organization, security is going to be an afterthought. So it's getting those leaders to recognize that there's value in what we do, not just being no, it's protecting data, it's protecting reputation, protecting finances, all that other stuff. And until you turn the corner on that, you're not going to get out of this view set that says we're just stopping you from generating revenue. No, we're protecting you as we're protecting ourselves as an organization, because these are the things that will happen or can happen or likely to happen. We need to change that leadership mindset to when the leaders start seeing it as this is a valuable function, then you'll see a lot of that go away, I believe.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. At a university, we don't necessarily have a product, right? It's the experience. Maybe if our product is the diploma, right, at the end of the course of study. And so when we focus on security, it's not because of revenue, it's because it enhances that whole journey, right? That educational journey. And we've seen that coming down, just as you've described, from executive leadership and not from the bottom up. So for those organizations that do see, we got a question that says, a lot of people see security as just an insurance policy. We're spending a lot of money on security tools. What ideas or behaviors can we do as a security community to help plant those seeds and get that executive leadership moving in the right direction? Michael, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think with that question in particular around employees still clicking on phishing emails, et cetera, I think often I see organizations that they will go through the test, they'll send the phishing email, they'll get the results of who clicked on it, who actually opened it, who inputted some sort of credential, and they'll map those metrics along a continuum, which is great because those are metrics that you need to understand. You need to understand what your users are doing. But too often organizations aren't doing a full feedback loop where they'll go and they'll talk to the individuals, they'll talk to the organizations and explain, this is what it looks like. This is what makes it a phishing email. Here are the key concepts that you need to look for, and this is what to watch out for. We need to do a better job of the enablement side So just going through the test is one thing, but actually enabling your people is something completely different. Maybe it needs to be one-on-one. Maybe it needs to be in a specific team setting to really get the people to understand. But I think the employees need to have ownership of their security posture in the organization. Again, it's not an us versus them, it's all of us collectively together. And I think it's vital for the users to understand and be security conscious because they need to be aware of the power they have in their organization. As we all know, a majority of attacks are now compromising user credentials. So all it takes is one person to click that one link in that wrong place. And now we are compromised and we're in some sort of incident response. So by getting people to really understand the power that they have in the organization, and then as we are going through all of our tests, whether it's phishing or otherwise, and getting them to understand end to end what's going on and how to prevent that, I think we can all be in a much better place.
Ed, how about you? What ideas or behaviors you've been able to bring to executive leadership to help influence culture?
So for me, a thing that's worked in previous jobs and in also as well in my current role is, and I'm going to some of my own background here to address this, is the idea of an enterprise security architecture, right? We have so many tools, and I don't want to, rag on any of the tools. They all do things that are important. What we don't necessarily always have is a sense of what business function are we protecting with what control, right? So SABSA is a great example of this two-way transformation or two-way pathway that says I have a business function A, I should be able to trace it all the way down to an implemented control. But it's that tracing, that connection between those two things that we often lack in this business. We just throw tools at a problem without understanding what business function it's actually serving. So it's not a fast solution, it's not an easy solution necessarily, but having this sense of why we're doing it to solve a particular business problem on the other side of the ledger, that is a way that can really start having that conversation about what, tools are not just insurance policies, they're actually serving a business purpose.
Excellent. Like that idea on tools and tying it to business functions. Jonathan, how about you?
Yeah, I think, looking at how to influence your culture, and kind of secondarily go to the people that have the purse strings and get them to release some money. I mean, it's important, I think, first of all, show them what happens when security is not ingrained in a company or when security is an afterthought, as Ed said, right? Like I've had discussions with my executive team. We have companies in our industry that have been hit, unfortunately, and you can see the impact that that's had on them as an organization. Now, that's kind of the first part of it, right? So that gets them to understand there's a serious problem, and then explaining that if we get everybody to buy in, it makes us stronger as a company and more able to withstand attacks that these companies unfortunately fell prey to. And I think one thing that's been very successful for us is, using way more of the carrot than the stick, and trying to influence behavior by identifying, part of our culture, identify someone that did the behavior you want to highlight. Someone clicked on a phishing email. Hey, great. One of the things we've done is send out just a quick newsletter or something where we interview, pick somebody that correctly identified a phishing email from the test. Hey, how did you know it was a phishing email? What did you do that now enabled you to identify, the 3 or 4 red flags we put in there? And that kind of reinforcement, people see that and are like, oh, I want to be featured in an email or a comm that goes out company wide, and I want to be celebrated. I want to be highlighted. And you get people to kind of want to be involved like that. And the way they get involved is identifying the phishing emails. So we found a lot of success using the carrot to change behavior, to change the culture, to get more of that individual ownership we've all talked about.
Great. Ed, did you have another comment on that? So you come off mic. Okay. So, I'm going to go off script a little bit here and just, we talked about closing the loop on training and having that enablement, tying tools to business functions, highlighting the good things. That all of those things sound great. It sounds like they could be resource intensive, and maybe beyond what we might scope in a typical day, at least for a security professional. So Ed, I'm gonna come to you. What are some steps that people can take to either close the loop, do that business function analysis? What are some things we can do to change that culture in those ways?
So for us at Warner, part of my job there is application security testing, right? So everything within a certain criticality has to be tested by the security team. So for us, so to Jonathan's point, we were accused all the time of, well, we knew this app to go live and it can't go live now because you guys are holding it up. Yeah, fine. Where we fixed that, where we worked very hard on fixing that, is actually going to, in essence, our customers who are the application owners and trying to get involved early, trying to do design work with them and give them templates to work off that we knew worked and were secure, but just going and understanding what it is they're trying to do. What does the app do? Why is it important to the company? It's got to be a two-way street. We can't expect the business to enjoy the benefits of cyber. It's just like without, us going to the business and saying, what is it you do? Why is it important to the company? So it's having that conversation, that basic sort of engagement with your users, wherever they are in the organization, to understand what drives them, what motivates them. How does our work impact them? How does their work impact us? So having that basic understanding of how the business functions that you're working with.
I love that. Yeah, understanding the customer and having them understand you has got to be critical. John, let's come back to you. You talked a lot about, highlighting the positive. What are some steps you can take or have you taken in your organization along those lines? What are some practical things people can do that's not going to be, overly resource intensive?
Sure. Actually, one thing, if I could just jump back and ask Ed on a point that he just made. Ed, did you find any resistance from any of the application owners that you went to? You're trying to understand what they're doing. You want to help. You want to get that two-way street going. Was there any resistance that you encountered where they're like, hey, I don't have time for this. Okay. I don't have time to bring security fully up to speed on what I'm doing. I just need you guys to make sure it's secure.
Yeah, no, there was initially, but time heals all wounds, right? So the more time we spent with them, the more time that we actively engaged with them, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the application owner, right? It could be a project lead on the team or an engineer on the team. We spent a lot of time making sure that we could overcome that resistance, and not just because usually it's resistance from the sense of you're taking cycles out of my day. I have things to be doing. I don't really want to be talking to you. But if we can show them there's value in the work we're doing and how we can make their life easier, so they don't have to recreate code every time they turn around. They can use some of our stuff or some of our vetted stuff, if you will. It solved itself. It wasn't easy. It wasn't overnight, but we worked through it.
Oh, thanks, Ed. I was just curious. You had mentioned that because I've seen some of that resistance and was curious how you handled it at Warner. So thank you.
There was a lot of it at one point, but we worked really hard at it.
It sounds like, relationship building, right? And ultimately, when you extend that goodwill and build those relationships across organization, certainly that's going to help influence culture.
Yeah, and sorry, Aaron, I didn't mean to hijack.
No, that was
the question
great,
with a question.
insight, yeah.
A genuine curiosity. I think the question you asked me was, what are some other steps we can take to highlight? Okay, well, I'll weave in kind of one of the questions that popped up about dealing with non-compliant employees. Yeah, the carrot versus stick approach, it only works if at times you do use the stick. But I think you try to wield that gently. I've talked to some colleagues that have worked in an approach where if you fail 3 phishing tests in, I don't know, whatever the time period is, right? 6 months, a year, boom, you're on a PIP, you're on some sort of improvement plan, formal report to HR, the whole 9 yards. I don't think that does anything to improve the culture at an organization. If you have a non-compliant employee, why are they not compliant? Do they either not understand the technology you're using, or the phishing test, or, however you're delivering a test or monitoring? Do they not understand that? Do they not understand why it's important? Or, are they working under a deadline where, yeah, I know I shouldn't have done that, but I did it. Here's why I did it. I think that's one place where, you just have to have the resources to manage that as well. It's going to take someone time to sit with a non-compliant employee and find out, why were you non-compliant? Now that doesn't mean everybody gets a free pass, but it does mean you can get some useful information and some feedback for your program. Like, oh, I would have never thought that, we need to make the font bigger or something like that. And there's always something to be learned. So I would say the stick is there. People know it's there and can see it, but rarely is it used to full capacity.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that speaks to Michael's point on closing the loop, right? And really getting down with that individual and seeing what's happening. And I think goes back to what both you and Ed have spoken about is really, if that user doesn't care about the consequences, then we haven't properly identified, the reason why they should care with that individual. So Michael, I'm gonna move on just a little bit for the sake of time. There was a good question that came in about resources being a big factor, right? And what do you keep in house and what do you outsource? And what is your perspective on that?
I think that's an interesting question. Again, I think that's greatly dependent upon each individual organization. I think anytime you outsource, of course, that introduces another level of risk, but sometimes when you insource, it introduces another level of risk. So I think it depends also on your expertise and what you have available in-house, what you can hire for. As we all know, the market right now for security professionals is difficult to navigate. I think a lot of those questions have to be answered internally as an organization. We have gone through various cycles of IT where we've elected to outsource everything and then we've brought it back in-house, and vice versa. We elected to build everything in-house and then we determined that it was easier to outsource. I think security is going to be one of these areas to where we might go back and forth. Do you want to externalize all of your, let's say, threat detection? I don't know. I can see that as being very risky. You're handing over a lot of the keys to the kingdom to somebody else. So I'm on the fence on that one. I know resources are a huge factor, but what does the organization believe? That it'll just be easier if they outsource everything? Like that's going to be an easy button and it's going to be equally as secure? Again, I'm not sure how to answer that. That's a unique question. I think that would be a good one to Ed or Jonathan to answer. I'd be interested in to hear their insights on that one.
It's funny. I was just was thinking through how I would have answered that. I will throw this caveat out that you can outsource the work, but you obviously can't outsource the responsibility, right?
That's right. Or the processes either. Like an outsourcer is not going to implement processes for you. Those have to be in place. Your procedures, your governance, your compliance. Those are things that you abide by that you're going to have to define for an outsourcer. So it It doesn't eliminate work is the way that I look at it. Sorry, Ed, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine, and you're absolutely right. I guess, resources are always tight. I've been doing this for 25 years, and they've always been tight. It is, I hate to say it, but automation can help to a certain degree. The more you automate, but again, that requires an understanding of process, right? So what are you automating? How are you automating it? Where are the alerts going? How are they being responded to? That sort of thing. And some things just don't automate well. You can't automate policy generation that I'm sure there's a tool out there that I don't know about yet that does it. But in general, those sort of human thinking processes require something more than automation. So I don't have a good answer, because I don't see us, absent a thermonuclear type of attack on a massive sector, getting a lot more resources. There'll be some, we're all stretched a little thin, but I don't see us doubling our staff sizes anytime soon. So I don't have a good answer for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, one thing I think it's important, if you're talking about some of the things that are related to culture, like if you bring phishing testing or something that interacts with your user base to try and get them to change culture, it's important to look at it from their point of view and how they perceive it. And if we outsource something that impacts them or gives them a negative view of security, then effectively what we have done is kind of knocked ourselves, because our users may look at someone outside a contractor like, well, it obviously wasn't important enough for our own security team to do it. So I kind of view it as, levels of importance from a security perspective, it goes down a notch, right? Because you farm that out to somebody. Even if the intention was, I don't have the resources, I have to farm it out. I think it's important to understand that end user perception, because if they perceive it as we care less about something because we outsource it, they start to care less about it.
Thank you. Difficult question. You guys were on the spot on that one. I did want to kind of touch this last question on culture being, now that we're in this new normal after COVID, a lot of people are in a hybrid or fully remote state now. How does an organization extend that security culture to the hybrid worker or that remote worker that's not going to be in the office, who doesn't have posters or signage or, just kind of that typical, maybe just presence that the organization typically has when you're in the office? Ed, we'll come back to you. How do we extend culture to that hybrid or home worker?
So I think, and we went through this at Warner right after COVID hit, we suddenly had a whole lot of video editing and VFX systems that were never designed to be remote suddenly being used remotely. So we had to build some stuff around that. I think you start by, not beating it into employees, but you build it into the processes that they follow, right? You don't let them on the network unless the machines have been scanned and checked, and you make sure you've got MFA turned on. You've got all the sort of what I call table stakes in the cyber world in place up front, so that people still can work. It doesn't matter where they would necessarily work from, right? But you've built processes. You've done, as Michael was talking about, the fundamentals up front, and allow people to work. But so this comes back to sort of what John was talking about earlier about Department of No. I wish for the life of me I can remember who told me this, but years ago I had somebody say, we should not be in cyber the gas pedal. Or the brake rather. We should be the gas pedal, and we say you can go as fast as you want as long as you stay within these guardrails. Just go. And so that's how we have to start thinking about doing things, and we can do that with the hybrid worker or the home worker if we give them the proper tools to do it.
Excellent. John, how do we extend this to hybrid workers in your environment?
Yeah, it's going to sound simplistic, but a couple of things that we did that had great success was, one, Ed mentioned, or I think maybe Aaron, you mentioned, the posters that you have in the office that everyone sees all the time. we took those and turned them into a screensaver and pushed it out to all the employees. So all the security posters, turned into a screensaver. And so, employee walks away, they come back, they see a screensaver, they start seeing those posters rotating, which, kept it, kind of front of their minds, The second thing was, I think I do have to say, I have a technical writer on my team, and God bless having her on the team, because she cranked out a series of quick tips for users. And it was some of the things Ed touched on, always use VPN, right? MFA. But it was also a series of other things, how to secure your home setup. Make sure you don't have personal assistants in your workspace. Just little 1 to 2 sentence kind of tips that kept security at the front of users' minds as they're working at home. Whether they're kind of hybrid and they come in the office 2 days a week, or they're full-time at home. It was a way for them to continue thinking, okay, I am working, I need to make sure my environment's secure, systems secure, things like that. So not the highest tech of solutions, but a couple of things that we found very effective.
Yeah, for sure. I love those low tech but effective solutions. Michael, I'm sure Rubrik probably has a number of remote workers. How do you extend that security culture?
Yeah, and I'm one of them. I've been a remote worker the entire time. So I think there's 2 ways to look at it. I think Jonathan hit great on the persona part of it, the human part of it. I think from a security and technical part of it, just realizing that it's another endpoint. And so what would you do to protect your endpoints internally? Of course, it's different if it's externally, it's different if it's in somebody's home, but then how would you think about that endpoint and protect that endpoint? How would you prevent that endpoint from being compromised from somebody else's network or that home network that user's on? So I think just by thinking about that end user's environment, that you have the human, and the human really teaching those security responsibilities should be relatively close to the same, regardless if they're in the office or if they're at home. Best practices are best practices. You're going to add a few of them because there's a workspace you don't know about, but as long as they're following those best practices that they would have internally, locking their laptop, not leaving passwords written out, there's some basics there that are applicable regardless of where that user lives. And then I think, of course, it's just around that protecting that endpoint, thinking about the nuances of an employee's office and making sure that you have all of the protection that you possibly can have on that system to prevent any type of bad actor, malware, et cetera. So thinking about the human, thinking about the device.
Great. All right. We only have about 7 minutes left. So I'm going to take this last question we got. What is the most significant management misconception about the importance of company-wide security responsibility, and how do we address that? So in 2 minutes or less, Michael, what do you think might be the most significant misconception about, the importance of all this security stuff?
I think this is a loaded question.
Yeah.
I might offend some people, but I think the biggest management misconception right now is cyber insurance.
You got 60 seconds to
saving grace is that is a very big misconception right now.
Okay. Jonathan, we'll come to you. What is your biggest misconception?
Well, Michael just stole one. It's a really good one, that cyber insurance is the panacea for everything. I think, I'm going to go back to something that we talked about earlier, that security is everyone's responsibility. And that, Ed talked about it. If you have leadership and management that doesn't feel that way, or that doesn't buy into that, everyone's going to pick up on it. If management doesn't think security is that important, that it's everyone's responsibility, everyone underneath is not going to have that opinion as well. And until that gets fixed, you're going to have a very hard time getting a strong security culture in place.
Great. Ed, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I want to talk about both those things. So the cyber insurance thing is, nothing's a panacea. Let's just start there. Right? Anybody who's trying to sell you a panacea is clearly in the panacea business and probably shouldn't be. But I want to come back to John's point is absolutely valid, that the biggest misconception in my view is the CISO is responsible for security, right? Solely, like they're invested in it and it's their responsibility, and come hell or high water, they're going to solve the problem. This is a team sport, folks. I mean, we all have to be working toward this. You can't just give all your security stuff to your CISO team, your security team, and say, go fix it. No. CISOs don't own the apps. They don't own the servers. They don't own the hardware. They probably don't even own the policy, right? There's a policy team that does that. So it takes more, to paraphrase Hillary Clinton, it does take a village, and we have to start acting like it.
Excellent. So just to piggyback on that idea, and I'll have everyone gets 60 seconds on this last thought. And maybe the summary is, if it's everyone's responsibility, how do you build that consensus outside of the security, outside of the CISO, outside of the security team? Like, what are some things we can do to deputize or educate or get other people on our side on this discussion? John, sorry, start with you.
It's okay. You can call me either. Usually Jonathan's when I'm in trouble. So
Right.
that's fine too. So a couple of concrete things again, right? So one, start a security champions program. Go to other departments in the business, go to finance, go to HR, and find someone. Everyone wants to be part of a cool group in an organization, right? Like, hey, you're going to be part of our champions program. We want to get your feedback on what we're doing. What's the perception of what we're doing? Is it hindering things, helping? That's something I think that is good. And honestly, again, low tech, a monthly newsletter does wonders for the perception of your security culture.
Michael?
I think the last thing people want is another internal meeting. So if you're going to run training, make it fun and engaging, get people involved. I think reward and recognize instead of punish and shame, and you'll get some better behavior out of that. You'll build a better culture.
Thank you, Michael. Ed?
I think you have to change the incentives. Honestly, it sort of goes to what Michael was saying and Jonathan were saying. You have to change the incentives so that security is seen as an enabler. And that's not just a tech problem. That is, Wall Street has to change those incentives, and investors and leadership and all the people who actually control the things that we do. Those incentives need to change. Until that happens, we're not going to see much progress.
Excellent points, all of you. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Ed, John, and Michael for being here. Appreciate the thoughtful responses and the time put into preparing. And I thought it generated great conversation and great ideas I think we can take back to our organizations. So thank you very much. And Michael Bordelon, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Aaron. And Ed, John, Michael, thank you so much for being here. I also want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic session. Now, this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Now, this officially concludes the Argyle CISO Leadership Forum, the evolution of information security. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Adobe and Rubrik. Thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content, and have a great rest of your day.